Thank you for joining us for the special online program hosted by the Mirowitz Center. My name is Laura Bryant. Our guide today is Elana Kaplan, former St. Louisan and an independent museum educator and lecturer. She was an educator at the Metropolitan Museum of Art for 25 years and currently leads private tours at the Met and other museums, as well as virtual tours for groups around the globe. Today, she's going to cover part 2 of a 3-part series, Summertime at the Met, which focuses on some of the special joys of summer. So she began last month with Beaches and Flowers. Today she's covering sunny days in American art, right after 4th of July. And next month, Elana will wrap up the program with songbirds and their habitat. So let's get started and help me welcome back Elana Kaplan. We're always happy to see you, Elana.
Great. Thank you so much, Laura. I actually was in St. Louis pretty recently and got to visit Laura in person, and also a trip to the St. Louis Art Museum, which was great. And I see that Sid Goldstein is on the program, and he gave me a bit of a tour, and I saw the Roaring exhibit, which was amazing. St. Louis Art Museum is just really an amazing museum. And we'll talk about that at the end today also. So today, in honor of the 4th of July, which we just recently celebrated, we're going to be looking at American art. It's also a continuation of American art program we did a couple of months ago, but we didn't get to the American scenes of everyday life. And these are some great paintings that I wanted to show you, kind of in celebration of the 4th of July. These are some interesting, humorous, and fun paintings to explore together. So I'm going to just start my. Okay. All right, so here we go. American Scenes of Everyday Life, 1840 to 1910. So as we're looking at a picture of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, I'm just going to give a little bit of a background of this topic and tie it in, again, because it was just the 4th of July, tie it in a little bit with American history and American art and American paintings, and then we'll go in and explore. And this background will give us a better understanding of the evolution of these works of art, some of the artists, and what we'll be looking at. So this is American Scenes of Everyday Life, 1840 to 1910. And American painters recorded everyday life as it changed around them. And we'll see this in the painting. They were capturing the temperament of their respective eras, defining the character of people as individuals, citizens, and members of ever-widening communities. So between the eve of the American Revolution and World War I, a group of modest British colonies became states. The frontier pushed westward to span the continent. A rural and agricultural society became urban and industrial. And the United States, which reunified after the Civil War under an increasingly powerful federal government, emerged as a leading participant in world affairs. And we'll see some of these things, especially the idea of the agricultural society becoming urban and industrial. We'll see some of these things depicted in our paintings today. So throughout this complicated, transformative century and a half, American painters recorded everyday life as it changed around them, capturing the temperament of their respective eras, defining the character of people as individuals, citizens, and members of ever-widening communities. At first, most painters embedded references to everyday life in portraits. And we did that a couple months ago. We looked at portraits, colonial portraits, and talked about them and how they represented different people and different times. And those portraits were the only works for which a market existed. But beginning about 1830, and largely in response to the development of public exhibition spaces in New York, Philadelphia, and Boston, some painters were able to free themselves from being dependent on portrait commissions and to adopt new subjects that would appeal to wider audiences. And those are the paintings that we'll be seeing today. So these artists worked primarily in the form of genre. And genre is a French word that means types or sorts. And in paintings, they refer to scenes of lower and middle class characters, which we'll be seeing today. And we'll see that the artists really favored depictions of courtships, families, community life in rural settings that were associated positively with fundamental national values. They reinforced in their works popular notions of American identity, and competed with contemporaneous Hudson River School landscapes for attention and patronage. And we've also done a talk on Hudson River School artists. So if anyone has missed any of these, they're all recorded and they're in the Mirowitz library of recorded lectures. So if you didn't see the Hudson River School one or you didn't see the portrait one, you're welcome to go back and look at those. So today, though, we're looking at American genre painters, and they produce works that were clearly delineated, sometimes humorous, as we'll see, sometimes didactic or moralizing, as we'll also see. And a lot of them are reminiscent of old Dutch master or French and English paintings and prints that inspired them. By the 1850s, American painters of everyday life expanded their subject interest beyond the individual and the family to encompass a wider horizon, especially the nation's politics and growing territory. So sometimes they did outdoor images that captured a wider view of American life. And as population and wealth increased, there emerged a newly energetic and diversified art market that included auction houses, art lotteries, and dealers who set up sales around cities. And this way, even middle-class people could buy works of art as well. Artistic competition escalated exponentially, and the profession opened to more artists, including women like Lily Martin Spencer, who we'll see today, who cast a critical eye on the domestic sphere from an insider's perspective. Responding to pressure to come up with novel subjects that would distinguish their works at exhibition and attract purchasers, many American painters took on current, complex, and often difficult topics, some of which we will see today. But they always enlisted euphemism or ambiguity and humor to portray these issues. The unique and overwhelming circumstances of the Civil War and the years of Reconstruction also changed American art. And we saw that last month with Winslow Homer and other artists who didn't want to show war necessarily, but they really wanted to heal the nation's fractured spirit. And so they turned away from political or war paintings and really focused more on the roles of families and the roles of women in their paintings. So we will see a lot of these works of art as we are going through our paintings. And also many late 19th century American artists recorded the lives of women as devoted mothers, dedicated household managers, and keepers of culture. A few recounted the experience of men at work and leisure and celebrated new American heroes. And as tension escalated between fading rural traditions and growing urbanization and industrialization, artists more often investigated their cities, wanted to show leisure, consumption, and entertainment. So with that background, we will start with our first painting. And hopefully some of the things that I referenced, you'll see immediately. So we'll take a minute just to look at this painting. And as you're looking at it, because there are a lot of details and some quite humorous details, as you're looking at it, I'm just going to give you a brief biography of the artist who painted it, because he is the artist who painted the next two paintings that we're going to be looking at. And the artist, his name is Francis William Edmonds. He was an American painter of genre subjects, as we're looking at today. He often painted in the style of 17th century Dutch painters. And he is very interesting. He kept up his painting career as well as a career in banking. So he was born in 1806 in Hudson, New York, into a Quaker family. He was skilled in drawing, but he found that it was too expensive to get trained in etching as he wanted to. So instead, he followed the path of his uncle into the business of banking. So while he worked as a cashier in a bank, he also took classes at the National Academy of Design in New York City, which had opened in 1826, and he actually started taking classes there in 1828. He first exhibited at the National Academy in 1836, and by 1838, he was elected an associate of the National Academy, and in 1840 as academic there. So the way he worked his schedule, it's very interesting, is he devoted his mornings and evenings to painting. And during the day, though, he maintained his career in banking. He produced 2 to 3 paintings every year in the manner of 17th century Dutch paintings, which you can see the influences of Dutch painting in this painting we're looking at here. His subjects were often literary, and he usually had a touch of humor in his approach. After about 1854, his genre paintings, which continued throughout this period of his life, shifted in later years to more rural paintings. So we're going to be looking at his earlier paintings from the 1850s, but later paintings were more rural. And that probably was because although he lived in New York, he was spending more and more time in the country. Edmund's paintings were well received in his lifetime, and they're found in museums across the United States. Although I did look at the St. Louis Art Museum, and I didn't find any, at least online, by Francis William Edmonds. Okay, so with that background of his biography to appreciate this painting, hopefully you had time to look at this painting. As I said, it's a very busy painting with lots of details. This painting, I don't know if anyone could figure out what it's about, but I will tell you the name of it, and then you'll know what it's about. The name of the painting is called Taking the Census. So that's what's going on here. Again, as I'm talking about the painting, look at it. It's quite humorous, lots of details. It was painted in 1854. And it's based on the United States Census of 1850. And during that census, they actually initiated a new requirement, and that was that the heads of household had to provide information about each of their dependents. Okay, so this painting is a reflection of that new census. And you can see that the artist is both making fun of it a little bit, questioning it in this painting. So this new regulation of the census that the head of household had to provide information about everyone who lived there, each of the dependents, it caused a lot of confusion among people, especially people who maybe lived in more rural areas or not as close to the city. So this humorous image is the earliest known portrayal of the census taking process. And again, this was painted in 1854. And here we see in this painting the father's painstaking efforts to recall his family statistics. Now he's kind of humorously, and Edmonds again is providing a lot of humor here. You can see the father is counting on his finger how many children he has, perhaps because he's again confused or not sure how much information he really wants to give to the census taker, which you can see who's standing over here. The census taker, notice how different he looks. He's got his hat, he's got his official book with a quill pen, and of course the census taker has his helper with an additional quill in case. And they're here, to find out how many dependents there are in the house and information. But the father perhaps isn't sure that he wants to give all of that information. So he's counting on his fingers how many kids he has, how many dependents he has. And notice in the background that some of the children are hiding. You can see a couple of the children behind the chair. One child has his finger to his lips, and it's a little bit dark, but there's another child here kind of hiding behind this dresser. So this is a very, humorous part of the painting. Another humorous element as you look around the room, a lot of details, but another humorous element that we can point to is this very small frame portrait of George Washington above the fireplace. And this is a reference to not only the political system. Also, this painting, although it was painted in 1854, George Washington was still the most well-loved and well-known political figure, even in 1854. So many people had small portraits of George Washington in their home, as we talked about in the past. But not only is there the small portrait, but it's so interesting that how the artist placed it, because the portrait is above the head of the father. And of course, we know that George Washington had his legendary saying about never telling a lie, right? As a father standing there, counting on his finger how many children and trying to determine if he should be honest about the number of dependents. So many other details in this painting. It's a very carefully lit interior. The lighting that's coming in from this, window/door over here, and also the attention to detail in this composition was inspired in part by earlier Dutch genre scenes. And as I had said at the beginning, in my historical introduction, that a lot of the American genre artists were really influenced by Dutch genre scenes. So we definitely see that here with all the detail. Just looking at the mantle, you can see there's some books there. There's a single candle, there's a clock, there's a teapot, a lot of details here. And then you can also see the fireplace, which in 1854 would have been used not just for warmth, but also, as you can see, there's a pot in the oven, also a pot in the fireplace, also for cooking. Many other details that you see on the floor, the hat on the floor, a couple of hats on the floor, a book, almost as if, the census taker had come in and there, either things were thrown to the floor in the effort of the kids to hide, or, they didn't really have time to clean anything up. You could see the mother sitting in the chair with the baby, also kind of looking and wondering if they should trust the census taker and everything that's going on. So it's certainly a genre scene in terms of, it's a middle or lower class family, a depiction of everyday life, the idea of taking the census, and showing really the humor, but also the confusion and the lack of trust in this whole new census process. I do have a couple of details of this painting that I wanted to show you, just a little bit of a close-up, but these paintings also can be appreciated in terms of it was painted in 1854 of that time period. So also looking at the clothing that people are wearing, and all the details really takes us back in time to this everyday scene in American life. Okay, so the details are just a little bit of a close-up again of these, the children hiding behind. Also notice their facial expressions. The children seem to be kind of having a little bit of fun here. The mother, a little bit suspicious, not sure, holding a sleeping baby. And again, father not sure how much information he should give over. And then, of course, this one child, which might have been a little bit harder, is hiding over here. Did the father tell the children to hide? Did they decide to, based on just having these official people come into their house? We don't know. But it's also fun in these paintings to come up with different questions and scenarios as we're looking at them. And that's also what the artist wanted us to do. And here we have a close-up again of the father and his facial expression, again, counting the children and kind of wondering how much information should I give to the census taker. Okay, so that is the first painting we're going to look at by Francis Edmund Williams. And here's the next one. This is from a couple years later, from 1858. And this painting is called The New Bonnet. So again, as we're looking at these paintings, a lot of details to look at. Also, as we're looking at, I'm remembering that many of these artists, especially Francis William Edmonds, were influenced by earlier Dutch genre artists. So also noticing where light is coming in these paintings, and we'll touch on all these things. So another favorite subject of this Francis Edmonds was the temptation of material goods. And we'll see this in other paintings as well. This was really one of his favorite subjects, but a favorite subject among this mid-century American artists, the idea of the temptation of material goods, especially for women. So if we look at this, as I said, the painting is called The New Bonnet. And you can see that really the subject matter is in the middle of the painting. It gets us to focus our eyes in the middle of the painting. And we can see here this young woman in the middle of the painting. She seems quite fashionably dressed, and she's admiring her frilly new bonnet. Look at her compared to the other people in the painting in terms of the way she's dressed and the way she's portrayed, and the fact that she's in the center of the painting, even the way she's standing. Look at that compared to the other people on the painting, and we'll talk about that as well. She's also standing in front of a map of the world, suggesting that she believes that consumerism will bring her worldliness and upward mobility. So again, there are a lot of details in the painting, a lot of hints to different things. So let's look at the other figures that we see in the painting. And again, as I'm talking about it, I'm sure you're recognizing some of these details and noticing some of these fantastic details in the painting. So the other people we have to the right of her are her parents. And what are her parents doing? Look at her dad. He's carefully examining a piece of paper. He's got his glasses on, and he's actually examining the bill for this hat. And notice his facial expression. He seems to be a little bit upset about it or even alarmed at the bill for this bonnet. And her mother is standing over the father's shoulder, also looking at the bill with some, alarm. So they're really not even looking at the bonnet. They're really much more focused on the cost of it. Okay. But although materialism at that time, which was rising in America, it was actually seen as a vice. And it was often looked down upon. And notice how the daughter, again, is dressed so differently than her parents. They're really clinging to more of the old world, and she really wants to become new and modern. But in the painting, the artist is indicating that the parents have their own vices as well. Not just that the daughter has this vice of materialism and consumerism, but the parents have their own vices. And you might have seen some of these details. You can see on the mantle, again, another painting that has a lot of detail in it, especially on the mantle of the fireplace. So on the mantle, you might be able to see there's a bottle of some kind of wine or something else, and a glass that's half consumed. And so that indicates that perhaps the father has this vice of enjoying to drink. And then behind the mother, you can see hanging on the wall is a mirror. And perhaps that's indicative of the mother's vice, which is perhaps vanity, because it's strange to have a mirror here in this scene. So Edmonds is really placing their indulgent middle-class lifestyle in context, and kind of showing the contrast between this young girl, who's a poor delivery girl. She's in the far left of the painting. And the way Edmonds paints it, he's really showing this young girl as the only sympathetic character in this painting. And she's, of course, the delivery girl, she brought the bonnet, she's holding the empty box. But Edmonds is really kind of focusing on this family as having all these vices, and this young delivery girl is the only sympathetic character. Now, again, this painting is characteristics of Edmonds' works, include in this form of genre. And here again, he's showing, as in his other paintings, middle-class characters in scenes from everyday life. And again, lots of amazing details. We have this dog kind of trying to figure out who this girl is who comes in the door. Again, the map of the world indicating that this family does have, and certainly the daughter does have this belief in upward mobility and wanting to be more worldly. And then interesting looking at the sources of light in this painting, which would have been found in Dutch paintings. So you could see the open door. So we have the source of light from the open door, and also this window. So the two sources of light. Now, interesting also, notice that on the floor, we have all these different vegetables, almost like a still life setup on the right lower corner of this painting. And this, I don't know that much about why Edmonds included it. Some people think it might be because he wanted to show his skill as a still life artist as well, not just as a genre artist, but also as a still life artist. But again, a lot of attention to detail in the painting on the table, and the hat on the hook, and all the other detail, even the wood floors that we see in this handle that leads to a trap door down here. So a lot of details. But again, putting it in context of American history, as we were talking about before, this was a time when Americans were really fixated on the problems of physical and moral purity. Again, this was the 1850s, and artists produced images that were didactic, but also humorous. So here, this is a very funny painting, a very humorous painting, but also points out, about morality at the time. Okay, so we're going to go on to our next painting. This painting was actually painted 18 years later than our last painting, but it is a similar topic, as you can see. As you're looking at the painting and maybe noticing some of the similarities and some of the differences, I'll just give you a little bit of a background about the artist of this painting, because he is an artist that was well known at this time. And also, he's the artist who painted the next three paintings that we will be looking at. So the name of the artist who painted this, his name is Jonathan Eastman Johnson, but he's really known as Eastman Johnson. He lived from 1824 to 1906. He was an American genre painter, and he was also a co-founder of the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Perhaps that's why we have a number of his paintings in the museum. So as I said, he was best known for his genre paintings, as paintings of scenes from everyday life, but he also did many portraits of both everyday people and also prominent Americans. He did portraits of Abraham Lincoln, Nathaniel Hawthorne, Ralph Waldo Emerson, and Henry Longfellow. And his later works, some of which we're going to be looking at today, show the influence also of the 17th century Dutch masters. So with that background, we're looking at another painting that has the same name as our last painting. This one is also called The New Bonnet, but this was painted in 1876. And during the 1870s, the artist, Eastman Johnson, found inspiration on Nantucket, which was Massachusetts island that preserves reassuring American traditions in an era of change. And that's, I think, exactly what we're looking at this painting, the idea of preserving American traditions in a time of great change. So here we have both of these aspects. We're looking at here an old-fashioned kitchen. But we have the idea of, again, materialism and consumerism, which is this new thing. It was this how American society was changing. It was kind of leaving behind the rural past and looking toward modernity and to the future. So here we have that represented by this young woman who's showing off her new hat. Again, the fact that we have this in two paintings, and there are more paintings about a new bonnet, shows this idea of getting these fancy new hats was really this new materialism and commercialism. But interestingly, here, the woman who's holding the hat, the daughter, is a little bit off to the side. She's not smack in the center of the painting like we saw in the last one. And I'll just go back to that just so we can remember. So here she's really in the middle holding up her painting. Here she's kind of off, a little bit off to the side, but it shows her showing off her new hat to her sister. And notice that her sister is much more plainly dressed. So we have two sisters here, again, one representing the past and, maybe American tradition, nostalgia, and one representing this new America focused more on consumerism and materialism. So, and then we have, again, the father in the painting, and he perhaps went on the shopping trip because he's dressed in a top hat. He still has his coat on, but after returning from the shopping trip, he is not interested in this hat. He's warming his hands at the fireside, and he's waiting for his beverage, which is being prepared by the more restrained daughter. So again, one daughter is, caring for her father, nostalgia for the past, the role of, respecting parents and taking care of parents, where the other daughter is really focused on her hat and her new purchase and not, concerned with her father at all. So we have the older man, we have this one sister who's dressed more from the past, and also we have the humble interior as you're looking around this home. All of those are exuding respect for the past. And they're a strong counterpoint to this fashionable daughter and her new purchase. And this painting and Johnson's narrative really commemorates time gone by, and it takes note, again, of this rise in consumerism. So we can see that this is what a number of artists are really focusing on, the idea of rising consumerism. Again, notice all the details in this painting. A lot of the interior, this very humble interior, again, the idea of nostalgia, warming his hands by the fireplace. You can even see the detail of he came in, took off his gloves, which are lying on the floor, didn't bother to take off his coat or hat yet. And he's really just worrying, wants the warmth and the idea of the home and hearth, the idea of the hominess of the home, and the contrast with the daughter. So I think it's really interesting to see these genre artists focusing really on scenes of everyday life, and maybe the dichotomy between some people yearning for the past and some people really reaching for the future. And we'll see that throughout our future paintings as well. Okay, another painting that we have here by Eastman Johnson. And again, as you look at these paintings, a lot of details and a lot of things you can figure out just by looking at them, what's going on. And that's a lot of fun about these paintings. It's almost, some of them are telling a story. This painting, we can see clearly right away that it's Christmas time. And that's the name of the painting. It's Christmas Time, the Blodgett Family. This was painted in 1864. Note the time of this painting. The time around the Civil War. This was painted by Eastman Johnson, and it's 30 inches by 25 inches. So this painting is really a conversation piece. This is a painting that you can look at and kind of wonder what the people are talking about in this painting, what they're thinking about. We see that it's a group portrait with narrative elements. Now, this painting was actually a commissioned painting. And as I had said before, a lot of these genre artists started off as portrait artists, and they were, commissioned for their paintings, but then they moved on to painting genre paintings that they weren't necessarily commissioned to do, but did hope to sell. So this was the first commissioned work of this type that Johnson would often paint. So this was his first commissioned genre painting. And it was commissioned by the man that you see standing in this painting. His name is William Tilden Blodgett. He was a supporter of the Union cause, and he was also a founding trustee of the Metropolitan Museum of Art. So you see that the man in the painting and the artist were both very much closely associated with the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And he is shown here with his family in the Renaissance Revival parlor of their house. Their house was at 27 West 25th Street in Manhattan. So this is a painting that was depicted, it was a scene that took place at the time of the Civil War, which was a time of urban upheaval. But it's interesting to look at this painting and note that it's a very serene interior. It's decorated for Christmas. There seems to be no hint as to what's going on in the world around them. Again, notice the interior of this painting compared to the interior of the last painting that we looked at. Again, the same artist painted these paintings, but here we have a very humble interior. And here we have this, upscale family in their home on 27 West 25th Street in Manhattan. And, notice the differences, still quite detailed, but notice the differences with the paintings on the wall, the carpets, of course, the Christmas tree in the corner, the way that the children are dressed, the way the mother's kind of sitting, just resting, relaxing. There's a little dog down here, a lot of details. And we also have the fireplace, but again, notice the difference between the fireplaces and even what's on the fireplace. We have a globe, a map of the world, and other objects that were imported objects. And just, this is just the parlor. But again, looking at the difference between this painting and the last painting, again, they're both scenes of everyday life. But here we have a scene maybe of a middle to lower class. Here we have a scene of an upper class family. And this one, of course, was commissioned. The last one was not a commissioned painting, but again, they're both genre paintings. So it's interesting to see, the subject matter, the clothing, the rich details of the interiors in these paintings. Also, again, I might sometimes forget to point it out, but as you're looking at these paintings, always notice the source of light, because that is very, again, an influence from early Dutch genre paintings, but you'll find it very much present in these paintings as well. Now, even though this is a very serene painting, knowing the time period it was painted in and the upheaval that was really going on in America at the time, the only kind of indication of what was going on in this painting, what was going on during this time period, the idea of racial strife and emancipation, the only indication is that there's a figure here. It's very small, but there's a figure on the table, and it's actually a toy, and it's a caricature of a Black male dancer. It's held by, it's on this table, held by this young boy. And this is the only indication that hints at, what was going on around them, the idea of racial strife and emancipation. The rest of it, you just have this serene family scene around Christmas time, as if, nothing of the upheaval that's really going on at this time period. So artists sometimes also were doing that. They weren't focusing on what was going on in the world, especially during this time period, but they were focusing more on domestic scenes and these interiors. Okay, our next painting is by an artist named Henry Mosler. Again, lots of details in this painting. We can spend a lot of time just looking at them, and I love looking at all the details, and kind of even, brings you back in time to that time period, not just the clothing, but the accessories and things that people had in their homes. So this painting is from 1870. I'm also telling the time of the paintings because I think it's interesting to put the paintings in context of what was going on in American history at the time. And that's why I did that whole introduction, and also, tied it into this week after July 4th, but just how, history and what's going on in the world, how it impacts what's going on in these paintings. So, or does it impact, or sometimes it doesn't impact, as we saw in the last painting. So this painting, you might have guessed what this painting is about as I've been talking about it. The name of this painting is called Just Moved. It was painted in 1870 by an artist named Henry Mosler. The size of it is 29 by 36.5 inches. And just a little bit about Henry Mosler, very interesting, but I want to just tell a little bit of his biography as related to this painting. Henry Mosler was actually born in what's current day Poland. It was then called Metropolitan Silesia, and it was near the border of the Czech Republic. He immigrated to New York when he was 8 years old. He was one of 200,000 German Jewish immigrants who came to the United States between 1830 and 1880. His family settled in Cincinnati, and we'll actually see another artist who spent time in Cincinnati. And that's where Mosler received his early training before he went to Paris and Dusseldorf to study art. So this painting, Just Moved, was painted in New York after Mosler completed his studies in Europe. Now, I'm going to point out some details in this painting, and you'll probably notice many as we're looking at it. Notice the rich palette and the unifying interaction of light and shadow in this painting as well. Typically, as here, Mosler grasps the dramatic element of an otherwise everyday situation. So this is an everyday situation of someone moving, but he makes it almost a little bit more dramatic. So here we have this family that we see. Their belongings are still packed, and they've just moved into an urban apartment. Maybe they moved from a rural area, and maybe they were drawn by the promise of a more prosperous future in a burgeoning city. So here, Mosler represented the home as a haven in which the perfect American family still presided, even after the Civil War, and even among humble belongings and the jumble of unpacking. It's still this idea of the American family. We have two parents, we have two children, and look at how Mosler depicted this family. And again, it's a time period of 1870, when it was a time that a lot of American cities were being challenged by increasing immigration, crime, and poverty. Also the idea of industrialization, and Mosler really wants to show the home as a haven. So here he's showing us the nurturing mother, right, who's holding her baby and just looking at her baby sitting in a rocking chair. So that's really the idea of the nurturing mother. And look at the father. What's he holding in his hand? He's holding a loaf of bread, and he's cutting into a loaf of bread. And it's I guess, hint to the idea of the father being the breadwinner. Again, it's this idea of nostalgia for time gone past, when the father was the breadwinner and the mother was devoted to just raising her children. And so we see the nurturing mother and the breadwinner father, and these are pillars of a family that is happy despite their very modest means. And I think we can appreciate their modest means by looking at it, but also thinking back to the last painting, which depicted more of an upper class family. Here we see the family of more modest means. And again, as American cities were being challenged by increased immigration at this time, again, this is the time even that the time period of a large Jewish immigration that Mosler himself had been a part of, but there's a lot more immigration. There's also increased crime and poverty. Mosler reassured viewers of the power of the family unit in the context of an urban life. So really, again, the focus on family, which we see a lot in these genre paintings. Now, interestingly, this painting contains autobiographical elements because Mosler himself got married in 1869. And his first child was born in 1870. Now, this painting was painted in 1870, but perhaps this is a reference to his child being born, to he and his wife. And it may also be a reference to the artist's own immigrant experience, that he himself, he was 8 years old, maybe around the time of this boy in the painting, he himself, his family had immigrated, and now this family is moving, and the idea of packing up your belongings and having everything kind of just around. But again, the detail in the painting of their belongings. We have a cat sitting over here. We have this wood burning stove over here, which needs to be put together. The wash basin and the washboard and the folded up mattresses. The dishes in a basket under the table. Some other objects on top of this closet here. The wardrobe. And the hat and the jacket, they've hung up here to try and get things a little bit set up. Also, the mirror hung up in the background. But again, noticing the very modest apartment and means compared to this last painting that we were looking at. Okay, moving on to our next painting, which is called the title really reflects what is going on in this painting. It's called A Music Lesson, and it was painted in 1870. Again, a different artist. The artist is John George Brown, but the same exact year actually as the last painting was painted. So I think we can see these genre paintings are scenes of everyday life, but among lower, middle, and upper classes. So really scenes of everyday life among the American experience. So this painting is, as I said, was painted in 1870 at a time when women were gaining independence from their traditional roles as wives and mothers. This is also apparently a time period of dropping birth rates, which is interesting. Again, when you think about the last painting we're looking at, and Henry Moser was really focusing on the woman as, mother and wife and having babies, and thinking about what was going on. Again, the idea of holding on to the past and nostalgia for the past, because this was a time period where women were trying to gain some independence from this traditional role. So it's interesting again to put history into the understanding of all these paintings. So here with that time period in the background, we have the artist John George Brown. Here he's really celebrating romance and marriage by depicting music making. And music making was actually an approved activity for courting couples. So here we have a courting couple, and they are making music together. Several details in this well-furnished middle-class parlor hint to the possibility that they are either engaged or they are going to be engaged. So we have a planter here on the left filled with ivy. And that was often seen as at that time period, it was a symbol about women who would cling to men or cling to their husbands for support. And we see that connects this painting to our last painting. We also have another symbol of love in this painting, which is the harp, which is even from ancient times that the harp was seen as a symbol of love. And then we have different framed works of art here, but we have a frame picture of a haloed female figure. So these are all symbols of love and romance and marriage that we see in this painting. We also see that the couple, they're dressed in complementary attire, and they're also both very much focused on their music making, which signal their compatibility. And again, as we're looking at this painting, notice the way that they're dressed, notice the furnishings in this household. Again, it brings us back to that Christmas time painting with a more lavish interior, with the carpets on the floor and the walls and the works of art and the paintings and of course, the musical instruments, quite in contrast again to our last painting. So it's interesting again to look at these paintings and view the contrasting ways that Americans were living at the time. Okay, so now we're going to go on to our next artist, which I mentioned briefly in my introduction. And the next few paintings we're going to be looking at were actually done by a female artist. Her name was Lily Martin Spencer. She was actually, her birth name was Angelique Marie Martin, but she changed her name as an artist. And she lived from 1822 to 1902. And the reason we're going to spend a lot of time talking about her background is because she was one of the most popular and widely reproduced American female genre painters in the mid-19th century. So we're going to be looking at 3 of her paintings today. But as you're looking at this wonderful domestic scene, I'm going to give you a background, a biography of the artist, because you'll see that her biography really gives us greater insight into her paintings. So she primarily painted domestic scenes, paintings of women and children in warm, happy atmospheres, as we see here. Although over the course of the career, she would also come to paint works of varying style and subject matter, including, for a time, she did portraits of famous individuals, including the suffragist Elizabeth Cady Stanton. Now, although she did have an audience for her work, the artist, Lily Martin Spencer, had difficulties earning a living as a professional painter, and she faced financial trouble for most of her adult life. Now, actually, the painting that we're looking at here, I'll tell you just a little bit about it, and then we're going to go into her biography. But she often used her family. She had 12 children. She often used her family as models for her painting. And in this painting, this is supposed to be her and her husband and her baby. And it's also her family's parlor. So that's a little bit of a background about this painting, but now I want to tell you a little bit about her life. So Lily Martin Spencer, she was actually born in England in 1822 to French-born parents. But in 1830, when she was 8, her family immigrated to New York, where they remained for 3 years before they moved to Ohio. So interesting, she moved at 8 years old. And also we talked about Henry Mosler, the artist who just moved. He also moved when he was 8 years old, around the same time. So when they moved to Ohio, Lily was homeschooled. Her parents were quite educated, and they homeschooled her. And it began what would be her long career as an artist. Her first artistic endeavors were likenesses of the entire household. She did works of art of her family and other people. And they were actually drawn on the walls of her family home. But her parents did not scold her for doing that. Rather, they encouraged her. They encouraged her love of art and her pursuit of art. Her parents had reformist tendencies, and it included the belief in more opportunity for women. So they really encouraged their daughter to become an artist. When she painted and drew on the walls of her home, a lot of people came to see her drawings, and she drew the attention of local artists, and she was mentored and helped, especially in coloring her charcoal drawings. Her first exhibition was in August 1841. It was held in the local church rectory. And then she traveled to Cincinnati with her father for an exhibition in the autumn of 1841. Cincinnati had many artists at the time. As we said, Moser was also in Cincinnati. And she would spend the next 7 years studying there. And that would be one of the most highly productive periods in her career. While she was in Cincinnati, she studied under various portrait artists. However, the exact extent of her training is unknown. She produced her most well-known and popular works during the decade between 1848 and 1858, and those are the paintings that we will look at. She was very rare in the art world. Most women used art as a genteel accomplishment, but not as a career. She, however, provided an example of a woman who pursued art as an occupation. During her 3rd year living in Cincinnati, she married Benjamin Rush Spencer in 1844. Her husband was an Englishman who worked in the tailoring business. However, and this is very interesting, and it'll inform on her paintings, once they were married, he no longer pursued an independent career. Instead, he helped his wife both in household chores as well as with her artistic work. So this was very, I guess, avant-garde at the time, that his wife was the main breadwinner in the family, and he really helped her. So although they didn't run a traditional family, from all accounts, they had a very happy home. They had 13 children, 7 of whom grew to maturity. And here you see this painting that we're looking at here as a very, looks like a very happy, serene home. So although many people feared that the fact that she got married would end her career as an artist, it didn't. And as I said, she would go on to become one of the most popular female artists of the 19th century. Now, unfortunately, the Spencers experienced a lot of financial difficulties. You don't see that in this painting, but that happened after this, because this painting was done in New York City. They moved to New York in 1848 from Cincinnati. Although she was already known through exhibitions at the National Academy of Design and the American Art Union, When they arrived in New York, art patronage was in the hands of the middle class. The middle class really wanted scenes that they could relate to. So Lily filled this gap with making these domestic scenes and genre scenes, often using her own family and her own pets as models, as we see here, her family. So she really combined her role as a mother, and she took her role as a mother very seriously, and her role as an artist in her art. Her paintings, as we'll see, are all positive and devoid of tragedy. They're really depicting endearing scenes of domesticity. Academics have commented that in this period, her paintings really show enthusiasm and happiness, also reminiscent of 17th century Dutch art. Despite her very positive reputation and people buying her paintings, there was a disparity between her popularity and her financial success. Most of her sales were a result of art unions, and the downfall of the art unions as a result of low membership subscription was a big blow to her sales. She also sold possibly 1 million lithographs of her paintings, but of these, she only received profit from the sales of the rights to the painting. She also illustrated books and magazines, but because they had a lot of financial difficulty, they moved first from Cincinnati to New York City, then to Newark, New Jersey, and eventually to Highland, New York. So they moved a lot. When they moved to Newark, New Jersey in 1858, they actually raised chickens and planted vegetables in order to stave off actual starvation. So they were really not doing well at that time. But Spencer continued to make portraits and commissions wherever possible. She supported her family through her art, but money always remained a problem. Her husband of 46 years died in 1890, leaving her a widow. So she had to sell her farm and move again. But she always had a studio near where she lived. She actually continued to work until the day of her death in 1902. And she had a career that spanned more than 60 years, and her paintings are in museums around the world today. So with that background of Lily Martin Spencer, we're looking at this painting. It's called The Conversation Piece, painted between 1851 and 1852. Again, that's when she was living in New York City, and she was doing better in her career. And this is what really she turned her attention to painting scenes of domestic life, as we see here. And she was working in a male-dominated art world, so she often carved out space for herself by really focusing on depiction of familial bliss, often drawing on her own experiences as a wife and mother, which we see here. Again, notice all the details in the painting, the way they're dressed. The father is holding cherries over this little girl, and she seems to be reaching for it. The details of the decanters on the table and the wine glass, and she's got her feet on this stool here, a doll that's on the floor. So all the details in these interior scenes really, and notice the mirror in this one. We haven't really talked about mirrors, but we see the mirror and the reflection of the sculpture. But again, this rich interior scene at a time where she was doing much better financially. Our next two paintings that she painted were actually humorous. And as I said, a lot of these genre artists were doing humorous paintings. This one is also by Lily Martin Spencer. It's called Young Husband, First Marketing. It was painted in 1854. So in this painting, she portrayed the unvarnished reality of male-female relationships, which chronicles the travails of early married life. Again, this figure in the front of the painting is based on her husband. He looks different in this one, but again, it's a number of years later. So here we have the unseen wife. We don't see the wife in the painting, but she is clearly not in full command of her kitchen because she sent out her young husband to procure groceries, a task which he is clearly and evidently not qualified for. So again, she used her own husband as a model here, and she depicted the man stumbling down the street and attempting to hold on to the items in his overflowing basket. And he was attracting gazes from at least one onlooker behind him. You can see that. And he's also suffering a public humiliation, as you can see in his face. So Spencer depicted a very humorous scene here, but in context of real social anxiety at the time, and that was the anxiety of setting up a household and running it efficiently. So now, with that background, take a minute to focus more on the details. Of course, you'll notice the embarrassed young husband spilling things from his basket, including this chicken, which is falling out of his basket of groceries. Notice the elegantly dressed passerby who's kind of snickering at the incompetence of this man. And again, Spencer is really touching on an issue of great concern to women in the mid-19th century, including herself as a wife and mother, the task of running an efficient household. And this really shows the behind the scenes of a working household, perhaps her household, since her husband, of course, was very involved in what was going on. So here she's using humor and comedy to show how the young wife lost control of her kitchen. She's been forced to send her husband out for the groceries rather than a servant, which would have been far more appropriate at the time. So again, here we see a Jean Racine, and she's distinguishing herself by taking on the subject, presenting the unvarnished realities of the male-female relationship and showing the difficulties of early married life, which other genre artists weren't necessarily doing. So this was really a radical direction for this talented young woman artist. And again, she was the most popular female artist at this time. Our next painting by Lily Martin Spencer is called Young Wife First Stew. And this is a companion piece to our last painting that we were looking at. So we had the husband going out for the groceries and now the wife trying to use them to make stew. So the produce that was obtained by the husband on his ill-advised shopping trip now appears on the wife's kitchen table. And look at all the details you can see. You can see the asparagus, you can see a pineapple, you can see eggs, lots of vegetables all over the place. And you can see that's the early stages of this wife preparing a stew. She's fashionably dressed, but looking quite distraught. She's busy peeling an onion, which is probably why her eyes are closed and she's kind of looking off to the side over there with that facial expression. And then she has this puzzled onlooker trying to help her. This is probably her household help, trying to figure out what she's trying to do, what's going on here. So when this painting was exhibited in 1856, it was actually singled out in the press for its technical expertise. Notably, Spencer's handling of still life. Notice all the still life images that we see in this painting, as well as the very unconventional subject matter, right? Quite different than some of the other paintings we're looking at. Still an interior domestic scene, but the humorous piece of it and also the honesty and earnestness of it, right? With the difficulty of the wife trying to figure out how to make this stew and run a household. And perhaps a lot of this is also biographical of what she was going through at the time, being an artist and a mother of many children. And this is just the two paintings side by side. Okay, so I know we're pretty much out of time. I just want to look at our last painting, and maybe this will just be to whet our appetite for a future topic, because I didn't want to talk about American art and genre artists with art connecting to St. Louis and Missouri. And we're looking at a painting here by George Caleb Bingham, who was known as the Missouri artist, who also did a lot of genre paintings. This is he painted this one in 1845, and it's fur traders descending the Missouri. And this is in the summer of 1845. Bingham returned to his St. Louis home from a winter stay in central Missouri, bringing with him several paintings and sketches. This is one of those works that he later sent to New York's American Art Union. And American Art Union was a subscription-based organization that promoted American art nationally through exhibitions and the distribution of popular prints. Remember, Lily Martin Spencer was also part of the American Art Union, and that's a connection between these two artists. So Bingham, who began his career as a portraitist, produced this distinctive genre painting with little precedent in his oeuvre. It's a tranquil scene, but it has with a luminous atmosphere, but it really is idealized the American frontier for the benefit of an Eastern audience. So as we're looking at this painting, it's a work of deceptive simplicity. It seems to be very tranquil, very simple. It's brilliantly composed and executed with delicate coloristic effects. These qualities give Bingham's most celebrated painting, this is really his most celebrated painting, a sense of luminous tranquility, suggesting a moment frozen in time. So looking at the details, we see a trapper quietly paddling a dugout canoe, his young companion elegantly centered against a mist of a veiled island in the background, and the young companion is smiling and reclining casually over his rifle. But there's something very, even though it's a tranquil painting of the scene, there's something disturbing in the trapper's gaze. He stares grimly and directly out of the boat, as though having suddenly turned his head to take note of us, the viewer. A lot of questions about this painting, a lot of mystery about this painting. Why does he look like that? Does he fear an incursion into his very silent world? Is he anxious that someone in another vessel might be a competing trapper or a thief who might want to steal some of the pelts that he stashed on the boat? Also, notice his hat. It's like a knight-like cap headpiece. It makes him appear almost comical, and his gruff demeanor contrasts with the young man's very affable, although exotic countenance. So interesting to note, by the time this painting was painted, the fur trade had already been industrialized. It was no longer the occupation of lone adventurers like we see in this painting, but Bingham really wanted to satisfy an Eastern clientele's nostalgia for the Wild West. So this painting represents an aspect of this mythologization of life on the frontier. Okay, so we're going to end with this, although I know that the St. Louis Art Museum has works by Bingham, including this one. And again, maybe this can be a future topic. And just I want to just take a minute to jump into the Met, just to see some of the paintings we looked at today in the museum. So we looked at this one, Just Moved. We looked at the music lesson. But as you're looking at the paintings in this room, you'll notice that a lot of them are these genre scenes. This is the Christmas Blodgett family painting. And the Met really has rooms full of these genre paintings, which are fun to explore. And also you can see the different sizes of them. And you'll also notice some other paintings that we looked at together in past talks. So I'm going to end here so we can have time for questions for those who can stay on.
Are you going to close out the slides? Or are you going to? Okay, there
Yep,
you go.
there we go.
Okay, I'm going to put everybody there so we can open it up for questions and comments. So first of all, thank you so much. It was so much fun and so interesting when you gave so many of the backstories and make sure we didn't miss. Like, for instance, I missed one of the children that was hiding behind the chair, very much in the background. So anyway, I don't know if anybody else has a comment. It looks like maybe, no, I thought somebody had their hand up. I was going to just also made the observation that in many of the paintings, especially the ones with the upper class families, the fabrics, they look so sumptuous. And I don't have any idea how they did that with paint, but it was very, very effective.
Yes, it's amazing, like showing the different materials and textiles, and yeah. The details are incredible.
You could tell the difference, not just in the color, but you could almost see the tactile difference in the fabrics.
Yeah. And even thinking back to the new bonnet painting with the wood bare floors I pointed out with the trapdoor, and contrasting those with some of the other paintings with the rich textiles on the floor. Yeah, it's really amazing.
So does anybody else have any comments or questions for the next program? And I love the fact a lot of it you're planting that seed for maybe a special program on
George Cameron Bingham.
Yeah, for our Missouri's own, right? There's
yeah,
a special connection there, and I think I definitely said we ought to pursue. I'm going to make sure I'm not missing anybody. Okay, I don't see anything. So we will see you next month. And we thank everybody for participating. Everybody stayed to the end. We really appreciate that, even though we ran a little bit late. And we'll get together again for the next, the final segment in the summertime series.
Great. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Elana.